Hello, hello, and welcome to Shatter Our Souls with Novaria. With the finally getting a gameplay trailer of sorts from Metroid Prime 4, I thought, you know what? There's no better time to actually get into this. So, for the foreseeable future, every Monday, we're going to have a new video from the Metroid Prime trilogy, all on Hypermode. The goal is as simplistic as it gets. I have to get from A to B, beat the final boss on Hypermode difficulty. Now, admittedly, this is the first time that I've actively attempted to play on Hypermode, simply because uh, normal mode and just playing the game in general has become video game comfort food for me. There are certain things that I'm just going to be able to blitz through because it's second nature. There are, there are other things that are going to be more of a challenge simply because I don't know how else to get around it. So, without further ado, it is time to let Samus do as Samus do. Now, for those who know the game and what actually is taking place at this point in time, according to the original Metroid timeline before Other M showed up, Metroid Prime took place directly after the original Metroid, about a 2-year difference if my memory serves. This is one of the vessels that broke away from planet Zebus at the end of um, the original Metroid, the frigate Orpheon. Now, the Orpheon is acting as a research vessel of sorts. Its primary purpose being to find a new base of operations for the space pirate forces. Now, for those that might be a little bit epileptic or other epileptic or sensitive to different light sources, I'm going to recommend listening over watching because this game tends to have a lot of flashing lights. Just to be clear, I don't want anybody getting sick. So, by my math and calculations that I've been doing, it seems like enemies do about 3 to 5 times more damage on hyper mode comparatively to the normal mode. They also typically take about 2 to or they deal 5 to 6 times more damage. So they deal 5 to 6 and take 2 to 3 times more damage. Which means all enemies are going to be spongier and take more of a punishment before anything comes up. This isn't the worst situation, but it is the offset of earlier programming and difficulty options more or less being a slider of health versus enemy damage. Um, but yeah, as I'm pretty sure those of you in the know can tell, this is the trilogy version of Metroid Prime, specifically for the Nintendo Wii. Reason for that is I don't have access to the remaster, nor do I have access to the original GameCube release. Um, but be that as it may, we have more than serviceable version of the game, and honestly, I've never found any issue with its graphics. But if you're interested in seeing just how beautiful this franchise can be, I do recommend looking at or watching footage of the remaster. It is absolutely gorgeous. So, at this point in time, the ship itself has fallen into disarray due to experiments and problems that have arisen throughout. Their ex- their experiments have broken out of containment, or have been dying unexpectedly. This distress signal that we got was from the frigate Orpheon, in that the Orpheon itself was not under attack, but rather falling apart from within. There was nothing really containing the problem anymore. And so their experiments, while only having about, I think it was something like a 5% success rate at absolute most, shows a little bit of what Phazon, this mutagen that shows up throughout the franchise, is actually capable of. Phazon is a mutagen that morphs and changes the being, making it larger, stronger, faster, and all around just more deadly in general. At the cost, it also reduces lifespan. Normally. Also, kind of creates a dependence on this substance, which, honestly, I'm not the biggest fan of, but it is something of note. Now, because of the nature of this run, and the fact that damage can rack up very quickly, I'll be stopping by almost all of the save stations. Oh, right. Sorry, while I'm thinking about it, I'm also turning off the hint system. This is meant to be more about just playing the game and enjoying it, and if I forget where something is, that's a me problem. And it'll just mean that I get to spend more time running around and actually enjoying the world as a whole. Win-win in my books. Anywho, with all of that being said, it's officially boss time. And we are going to be tackling the Parasite Queen. Now, the Parasite Queen is, of course, a Phazon augmented beastie. One of the various experiments of the space pirates. As a result of it being as large as it is also more volatile, more dangerous, and aggressive. Okay. Another thing I like about the Prime Trilogy version is that I can do all of my aiming manually, something that the original didn't have access to. If you're ever interested in reading up on some of the lore of the characters, some of them are pretty interesting, some of them are kind of mundane. I tend to play more for the action and the world in and of itself than every individual piece of lore and morphology. It's a personal choice, but if you're interested in that, all the power to you. Parasite Queen's got much better aim this time than usual. But, better aim or not, she stands no chance against Samus by the looks of it. I'll admit that I feel like the original game, or Prime 1, is going to be the easiest of the three, being that its game design philosophy was very different from 2 and 3. Okay. The Parasite Queen has been defeated. And also fell into a nuclear reactor core. So... time to get the heck out of here, apparently. What I like about these evacuation sequences is that it takes the core fundamentals of the game's traversal and says, okay, what if we were able to test that? Let's see how you could actually do under pressure. Which I think is very interesting as a design perspective for Samus, given that Samus is put in in life-threatening circumstances on a fairly regular basis, these escape sequences show that, in part, why she is as strong of a hunter as she is. She's cool as a cucumber under pressure, and is able to actually hold her own in very, shall we say, daunting battles and tasks. Cool, so all the parasites have breached containment. It's a very sticky situation. But, yeah. Overall, I'll admit that this is partially coming out of just pure excitement for Prime 4. I did the math. We've been waiting on some form of news in terms of the design perspective of Prime 4 for over 7 years. Which might not seem like much for some games, looking at something like CD Projekt Red's Cyberpunk. But the thing is that Metroid and Metroid fans have been waiting for new releases for a long time. So, here's hoping. I think given what we've seen, it's going to be a very beautiful game. Anywho, at this point, we got about 4 minutes left until the frigate Orpheon drops out of orbit. So, yeah. One of the many things that I suppose draws me to this game, this world as a whole, is the concept of Samus herself. She's strong, she's independent, she's capable. But she's also very vulnerable at times. And even at her most vulnerable, she still runs head on into what needs to happen, what needs to be done. Because if she can't do it, who can? Anywho, we're just gonna cross the bridge here and shut down the defense systems. Yada-da-dee-da. And just like that, no Varia suit. I mean, yeah, no Varia. After Samus's greatest weakness, a wall, we've lost the Morph Ball, the missiles, the Varia suit, charge beam, grapple beams, you name it. Basically everything that makes Samus as powerful as she is in late game, she has lost in the first couple minutes of this. Now, I have a love-hate relationship with that design philosophy. The reason I like it is that it gives you a taste of what the late game is going to be. A goal. But what I dislike about it is it feels like it takes forever to get back to that point, to actually push yourself to get to where the game will eventually be. And with that, we're going to be taking down the mechanized dragon, or at least chasing it down, because Samus has some unfinished business. with that, the tutorial is officially over, and it is now time to begin some ground-based recon. The game has officially begun. So, I'm going to be completely honest, I don't know how strong enemies are actually going to feel or be. I don't. So, there's going to be a fair bit of experimentation as I go along. Partially because, again, this is my first time ever attempting Hypermode. But if there was a time to do it, now is the time. Yeah, that doesn't bode well. What? 4 actual hits land? That's not ideal. Now, I'm leaving in the elevator loading screens for this video. If anybody wants them removed in the next, please let me know. Just drop it in the comments and I'll be happy to. I just want to make sure that those who are watching and seeing this have the choice and whatnot. I am taking out much of the loading screens as far as save zones, simply because that's not something that is necessary in my world. Anywho, we are now in the Chozo ruins. The Chozo ruins were kind of the last vestiges of the society that was here before everything collapsed. And one of the things that draws me to this area actually is the architecture. This desert landscape, this desert landscape here really doesn't do the area itself justice. And I think that's something that I've never really touched on in a prior video. The world design of various games tends to be very formulaic in nature at times. And I'll be honest, the long hallways with beam enemies and bats is very common in Metroid. What is uncommon, however, is that each individual room is as distinct as it is. Each section of this, you can tell, had some level of thought and preemptive ideas behind it before it was made. But we've gone from a desert ruin to a swamp room in the matter of 3 doors, which might seem like a long distance, but in a lot of games that's a huge amount of variety in the landscape. Anywho, I'm hoping for the best here. It is time for the second boss of the game, the Hive Mecha. Now, the Hive Mecha is one of those bosses that you either love it or hate it, and most people would lean towards the latter. The idea behind it is that the mechanization in the center over on the edge there is a war wasp hive. Effectively, it is housing a colony. The easiest way to defeat the hive is to keep an eye on the upper left corner, the radar. It will tell you enemy positions and more specifically when they stop, so that you can find and take down the enemies reasonably well. It looks like they've already taken down a third of my health, which, well, close to a third. Which doesn't sit well with me given the situation. Also noticing that I'm not turning around as fast as I would otherwise like. But yeah, that's a small problem, I suppose. Yeah, could I aim properly? That'd be nice. The downside of the point-and-shoot variety of gameplay is that I actually need to be able to see what I'm pointing at and actually be able to point at it correctly instead of hoping that I've got the right spot. Anywho, I'm not sure how much people want me to go into the lore of this area or what's going on in the game at this point. But effectively, Talon 4 is poisoned. The long and the short of it. And Samus was prophesized long before her arrival that she would cleanse this world of said poison. I think that's about as much as I am willing to offer at this moment in time. But with that, the second boss is down. Actually, a lot easier than I was expecting. And we have the missiles. With the missiles in tow, a lot of areas and upgrades become available to us. But that's going to be a bit of a longer term thing. We've also doubled the health capacity. So I can actually take a hit and not worry anymore. Which is perfectly fine by me. So, on the way back here, I think I'm going to stop and get a couple upgrades if I can. Because every little bit counts, and because I don't exactly know what I'm walking into, the more upgrades I have in the long run, the easier it's going to be in... The more I gather on a consistent basis, the easier this is going to be in the long run. So, yeah, I think that makes sense. Anywho. I've always kind of been... I don't know. I don't necessarily like war wasps. I like the idea behind them of being a constantly respawning enemy. My issue with them comes from the fact that there is very... They're not hard to beat, so you don't want to use your good gear on them. But they're consistent and hard enough, as well as in large enough numbers, that they really cause issues in the long term for anyone caught in a battle with them. Be that as it may. I think I got enough time to take one more boss down. And then I'm going to finish off each video at a save point. That way, there's a guarantee that every time I boot up, I'm in the same location, and you don't have to worry about missing anything. Theoretically. So, yeah. Now, Metroid Prime is kind of a weird game in terms of speedrunning. I know that I looked into its speedrun community a few years ago, and Prime itself could be beat in under 1 hour, which is absolutely absurd. But the thing is that what they did to do so broke the game in 5 Ways to Sunday in mere moments. As soon as they touched ground on Talon 4, they had the space jump boots, were able to get various upgrades right away, very easily. Because they didn't have to wait for the upgrades to become available later on. Alright, just a big bunch of beetles. Shouldn't be too hard, just... Okay, one down. Oofty. I don't know if I'm hitting them very much or not. I'm gonna go with probably not. I'm not doing any splash damage, so I'm just running in circles and hitting the ground. Okay. They are very generous with their missiles right now. Which is good news for me, I suppose. Means that I can use my weapons without fear of running out of ammunition. which I admit once I get super missiles, I love those things. And time for the official third boss, the plated beetle. This is ironically the only boss that I can think of off the top of my head that becomes one of two that become a regular enemy overall. Which isn't the end of the world. It's more about teaching you the basics of combat. Well, the first one while the Parasite Queen was aimed at getting the player to pay attention to their surroundings. The hive mecha being to teach the use of the radar. And for this, to be able to to properly teach the dodge. Every small segment thus far has built upon the prior bosses, meant to make it so that each player understands the basis of the controls, so that they can continue forward without much issue. Anywho. So, with everything in mind and how we've been going, I'm curious to hear what you think. Is this a franchise that you're interested in me checking out on a deeper basis? Are we aiming for completion on this run, or is it going to be when we get to the end, we get to the end? Ultimately, you decide. What I'm here for is to be your guide, to show you the wonderful and beautiful world of Talon 4 and how it was designed, and hopefully shed a little bit of light on why the Metroid franchise is as beloved as it is. I figured that starting with Prime would give a much needed first look into this universe. Its character, its primary character, and why Samus is touted as being as powerful as she is. Anywho, I think next time I'll be able to tackle probably 2 more bosses. At least that's the hope. I'm looking to keep a really good pace for the beginning, and slowing down later on as the game gets a bit more intensive in terms of its combat, because ironically I'm not feeling that this is much harder than normal mode. I mean, enemies hit harder, I take more damage, I do less damage, but otherwise it's seeming pretty simplistic. Anywho, if you like what you see or are curious about next time, drop a like, leave subscribe,